The closer we get to the Voice referendum, the more feverish the surrounding debate. We've been keeping track, and here are the political moments worth setting straight, just from this week. On his regular appearance on Sunrise, Australia's top-rating breakfast show, Barnaby Joyce was asked about Peter Dutton's idea of holding a second referendum for constitutional recognition of Indigenous people. That is, if the already existing referendum we're all about to vote in, which also includes constitutional recognition, and he is actively campaigning against, fails.
We've always supported recognition of Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal Australians. And this referendum is two parts. It's recognition of Indigenous Australians, which I personally think would sail through. And then there's other things stapled to it. The Voice, which we haven't seen the legislation.
The Voice isn't stapled to anything. It's the main game, the entire point of the referendum. It's also what was asked for in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And on the legislation, of course he hasn't seen it, because he, like the rest of the Parliament, gets to help shape it if the referendum passes. You are not voting on the legislation. You're only being asked to vote on whether a voice to Parliament should be in the Constitution. That's it. That's the whole shebang. But this is Barnaby Joyce, so we weren't done with the questionable claims just yet.
It's a racial-based clause where certain people get access to it of certain DNA and certain skin colours and others don't.
Whew. Not only is that highly offensive, it's fundamentally untrue. The Parliament gets advice on all sorts of legislation based on the impact it would have on certain communities, including regional communities, which Joyce knows, seeing as he represents them every day. The only way the Voice would be different, if it's in the Constitution, it always has to exist in one shape or another.
So Barnaby,
that's
if you
so
guys...
confusing, the Voice.
But is it really that confusing? Because Peter Dutton has said that he supports legislating a voice, but he just doesn't support having it in the Constitution. So the Voice model is clear enough that he supports legislating it, but when it comes to putting it into the Constitution, suddenly it becomes uber confusing. And that is a confusing position, which might explain this from Anthony Albanese in Parliament this week.
Now, the Leader of the Opposition wants to defeat this referendum for political reasons. No one is asking for a second referendum, which is his position. And then he said we can change the question. He voted for the legislation. He sat over here and voted for the legislation.
That was moments before Deputy Liberal leader Susan Ley then raised the apparently important issue of page count.
The authorised official history of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, written by co-chairs Megan Davis and Pat Anderson, was published 6 days ago. The almost 200-page hardcover book states, quote, "The statement was drafted and overwhelmingly endorsed by the Convention's delegates. It is 15 pages long," end quote. Does the Prime Minister still maintain the Uluru Statement is just one page and that any suggestions otherwise are conspiracy theory and nonsense?
The politics around this are simple. The goal is, as Steve Bannon once so eloquently said, to flood the zone with shit. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is one page. That's it. Yes, there was years and years of work and meetings which went into that one page, and there are hundreds of pages related to that previous work. But the statement itself is one page. And then we ended the week with Peter Dutton claiming in his weekly chat with Sydney Radio 2GB host Ray Hadley, questioning Indigenous leader and AFL executive Tanya Horsch's story about the amputation of her lower leg due to complications with type 2 diabetes. Horsch left hospital to attend the launch of the referendum date. She told the crowd that she was not without privilege and access to services, but the service design had let her down. And she believed if a voice was in place, there would be people around the table who would understand her story and experience and do what they could to make things better. But this is how Dutton heard that story.
I heard a story the other day of an Indigenous leader in Melbourne, I think it was, who lives close to the city of Melbourne, is on a high-paying job. She had type 2 diabetes, and sadly, as I recall the story, had to have part of her leg amputated. And she made the claim that somehow the health system in Melbourne, inner city Melbourne, had let her down as an Indigenous person, and that this was somehow justification for the voice. I just don't think we should allow these sorts of stories to go unchallenged, because most Australians want to see a better situation for the kids in Alice Springs. There's no question about that.
So Dutton took Hosh's story and attempted to spin it as urban versus rural Australia, that the voice is something being agitated for by people with high-paying jobs in Melbourne, and ignores the plight of kids in Alice Springs. And apart from the fact that she did not say what Dutton implied, there is also the fact that Indigenous people have type 2 diabetes at rates 2.9 times higher than the national average. And with that comes higher complication rates, higher death rates. We cannot pretend that being Indigenous, no matter where you live, doesn't come with disadvantages, especially when it comes to health. And that was her point. There's 5 weeks until Australians vote on the referendum, and you're all going to have your reasons to say yes or no, and that's personal to you. But when it comes to the politics of the campaigns, we'll be watching and fact-checking along the way.